Hey everyone, Sam here from Sugar Spun Run, and today I'm showing you how to make a homemade monkey bread. I am so excited to be sharing today's monkey bread recipe with you because it took me so long to get this recipe just right. We are doing this completely from scratch today. No pre-made, refrigerated, store-bought biscuits. Everything is made right at home in our mixing bowl, and I think you're going to love this one. We are also not using yeast. I know a lot of homemade monkey breads use yeast. This is much simpler, and the results are just as good. Now, to get started, you're going to want to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. The next thing you're going to need is a large mixing bowl, and you do want this to be a big mixing bowl because we're going to be adding a lot of stuff to it. We're going to be adding 4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and yes, I know that sounds like a lot, but we're using a lot of flour, so we need a lot of baking powder in this recipe. Finally, we're going to add 1½ teaspoons of salt, and you'll just want to stir everything together until it's completely combined. Now the next thing that you need is 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and you want this to be nice and cold. Ideally, you would even pop this in the freezer a couple minutes before you begin the process so it's really cold and firm when we get to this step. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut the butter into our flour mixture. You can use a pastry cutter if you'd like, but I like to use the same technique I use when making my biscuits, which is to take a grater and grate the butter into the flour mixture. Now, as you can see, I've actually left some of the wrapper on the edge of the butter. Just makes it easier to grip rather than trying to hold on to a slippery stick of butter. Now, once you get down to the bottom, that's going to be a little bit hard to grate without grating your fingers, so I just like to use a knife and cut up that last little piece. Now let's stir in this butter so that it all gets nicely distributed into that flour mixture. If you see it clumping any, you're going to want to use your spoon or a fork to break that up. You want the butter to be nicely distributed. All right, this is looking pretty good. So the next thing we're going to need is 1¼ cups of whole milk. Now you want this to be cold, so don't pull it out of your refrigerator until you're ready to add it to your flour mixture. Now we're going to stir everything together until the milk is nicely combined and we have a dough that's beginning to cling together. We have a nice, pretty shaggy dough here. It's a little bit dry, so I'm actually going to use my hands to work it together a little bit so we have a nice cohesive dough. Now you don't want to overdo it with your hands. Your hands are warm and ideally this dough should be cold, so you don't want to be melting the butter, but it's totally fine to get in there with your hands just to work everything together and get that flour all absorbed. You don't want to be seeing a lot of dry flour in your dough. This is actually looking pretty good. Don't be worried if you can still see some of those butter pieces. That's actually totally fine. So since this is clinging together pretty nicely now, what we're going to do is we're going to transfer it to a clean, lightly floured surface. I'm just going to lightly flour my hands and I'm going to just work this dough so that it's a nice, pretty even disc. It doesn't have to be completely smooth, but you want it to be pretty uniform in appearance. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to flatten this with our hands until it's about a ½ inch thick. I like to keep it a nice, neat rectangle. Once you have a nice, even rectangle, you're going to need a large, sharp knife. What we're going to do now is we're going to cut this rectangle into pieces that are about 3/4 of an inch. When you're cutting, you want to make sure that you press straight down, so you don't want to saw through the dough. This is going to help keep it all from clinging together and baking together when it's in the oven. Now you're going to need either a bundt pan or a tube pan for baking this. Now I've gone ahead and I've lightly greased the inside of the pan with butter. You're going to want to do the same. We're also going to need to prep our cinnamon sugar mixture that we're going to roll all of our monkey bread pieces in. What you'll need for that is just a ½ cup of granulated sugar and 2½ teaspoons of ground cinnamon. You'll just want to stir this together with a spoon so that the cinnamon and sugar are nicely combined. Now each piece of our monkey bread is going to take a nice cinnamon sugar bath. You want to get each piece completely coated with that cinnamon sugar mixture, and then we're just going to place it into our prepared bundt pan. When you're finished rolling all of your monkey bread, you're still going to have some cinnamon sugar left over. We're just going to sprinkle this over the top. set this aside and we can go ahead and head over to our stovetop. Now we're going to be making our glaze, which makes our monkey bread nice and gooey. The first thing you're going to need for that glaze is 18 tablespoons of salted butter. If that seems like a lot of butter, it's because it is. We want a really nice and gooey monkey bread. We're gonna add this butter into a medium-sized saucepan. Along with the butter, we're going to add 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of firmly packed light brown sugar. Now turn your heat to low and we're just going to stir everything together until the butter is melted. Once your butter is melted, you'll want to turn your heat up to medium and we're going to bring this mixture to a boil. All right, now that everything is boiling, we're going to remove this from our heat and we're going to drizzle it evenly over our monkey bread. All right, our monkey bread is now ready to bake. We're gonna take this over to our 350-degree Fahrenheit oven where it's going to need to bake for about 30 minutes or until the monkey bread pieces are baked through. Let your monkey bread cool in the bundt pan for about 10 minutes, and then once it's cooled a little bit, we can go ahead and invert it onto a serving platter. So at this point, your monkey bread is really hot. You do not want to dig in right away unless you don't mind burning your fingers and your tongue. So I'm gonna let this sit for a couple minutes and then we can go ahead and dig in. And that is how you make gooey, rich, homemade monkey bread completely from scratch. I cannot wait to dig into this. So I just want to thank you guys so much for watching and following along. And if you try this recipe out, please let me know what you think. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. It's so much better than anything you would get at the store. Hey, if you guys enjoyed today's homemade monkey bread recipe, I would really appreciate it if you would give me a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also, if you enjoyed today's recipe, here are a few others you might like as well.